Good morning. Today is Friday, May 1st. Welcome to Simply Trade, Cindy's version. I'm Cindy Allen, CEO of Trade Force Multiplier, a global trade consultancy service that services importers, exporters, customs brokers, freight forwarders, doing everything from high-level trade strategy to everyday kind of projects like classification and risk determination. Today, program is brought to you in association with the Global Training Center. In Simply Trade, I take a Taylor Swift song and base an international trade update on it. Today's song is Happiness, but I'll get to that in a moment. And I have to take a moment to shout out to my friend Melzy Wilson, who actually got me earrings that say Swiftie on them. So if you're seeing this clip in visual, you can see my crazy Taylor Swift Swiftie earrings. So shout out to Melzy Wilson from Global Solutions. She's also a consultant here based in Memphis. So give her a look up on LinkedIn if you see her. Today we have quite a bit of trade going on. First off, we're not going to focus on CBP. We're going to look at overall what's happening in the trade industry. I think everyone's getting a little caped out. That's all anyone ever wants to talk about right now in international trade. So we're going to focus on some other things. AGOA, the U.S. Trade Representative, is seeking comments on the trade policy recommendations for the African Growth and Opportunity Act, also known as AGOA. Comments are due by May 15th, so 15 more days, and it expires in its current form at the end of the year on December 31st. So if you are a beneficiary of AGOA or expect to be or have operations in Africa, you may want to take a look at that and make comments to the USTR. Internationally, the EU adopted a revised sanctions policy against Russia to address circumvention of rules and robust energy measures. This is just building on what they already had in place. It also addresses banking and cryptocurrency with further restrictions on that, which have had a chilling effect in some sectors. But if you're in the energy sector and have operations in EU, you'll want to look up those revised sanctions from the EU. At the same time, OFAC, which is the Office of Foreign Assets Control in the U.S., has loosened contracting for sanctioned Russian entities, specifically in the oil and gas industry. This has been a response to the gas prices and other restrictions based on the war in Iran and the continued blockage of the Strait of Hormuz. The DOJ, the Department of Justice, actually pursued a case in plywood. It was a fraud case where importers were bringing in plywood that was actually Chinese in origin and mislabeling that. Case has been brought to trial and a finding of fraud has been found for those. The DOJ continues to pursue buyers of the large-scale Chinese plywood import scandal. The prosecution is under the Lacey Act, which is the act that is part of the Farm Bill that was enacted to protect forests and other articles or other wood articles from being imported, as well as mislabeling of wood items when it comes into the United States. And the prosecution of the buyers hinges on willful blindness. And that's really ignoring red flags about suppliers' conduct when you're actually pursuing or have a contract with those suppliers. The case called out the fact that the buyer knew that the supplier was indicted and prosecuted for bringing in actually Chinese plywood and in a fraudulent manner, and that they ignored that as a red flag. So it only goes to highlight that not only do you need to know your supply chain, but you need to measure your risk in that supply chain and know who you're dealing with, know where the goods actually come from, do some of that origin tracing like you would for forced labor in more of your actual supply chain processes, because no one believes that plywood is made with forced labor. However, willful blindness in pursuing a buyer is really something that the DOJ is focusing on, and not just in plywood. If you have a concerning supplier, you may want to do a little research on that. Good news, in a news blog that I received, there were more than 70 trade or compliance positions open. This is our moment, trade compliance professionals. We have a lot of opportunity here, and I think that speaks to the complexity of the international trade environment that's happening right now. So go out and look. And perhaps you can move up in your current position, or if you're happy where you are, good. just know that you're probably highly valued right now. In shipping news, OOCL was ordered to pay the bankrupt shipper Bed Bath & Beyond, which filed for bankruptcy quite some time ago, for excess fees during COVID. $45 million was awarded for services not in accordance with contracts. This is the largest award in FMC history. So if you are looking at bills and wondering if the FMC has any teeth right now, I would say yes, they've become more prominent in the last few years and continue to protect shippers from the vessel operators coming out with fees that are not in keeping with the service contracts and outside of the guidelines. I mentioned the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz blockage hit a stalemate with both sides asking the other to stop the blockage. It's really hard to say where the situation goes from here. There's a new Wall Street Journal article out this week that outlines the situation and I think it's really a great article to read to get the background facts and also to understand both sides. But we do know this is affecting oil and gas prices across the United States and actually globally. There's been reports recently that jet fuel in the EU is becoming a scarce commodity and may impact the availability of flights coming to the United States. So quite a situation we're in right now. So why did I choose the song Happiness? Well, I think it's a very complex song. Happiness is from the Folklore album. It doesn't express one emotion. It doesn't just talk about happiness. It doesn't just talk about being angry or sad or upset or happy. It really looks at an entire situation by someone who's lived through a complex situation and understands there's just not one way to look at it, and there's just not one emotion that we're feeling. And isn't that just where we are in international trade today? First, we had the tariffs, we had Section 301, we had the removal of de minimis, and then we had Section 232, and we had IEPA, and then we had the Supreme Court decision overturning IEPA. Then we had 122 section with additional duties. Now we're going through that CAPE refund process, while we're also seeing more and more examinations and more investigations on Section 232 and 301 as those cases proceed. So we are a very, very complex environment. And speaking of CAPE, which I think is one of the most complex environments, remember, ACE, which is a system that collects all the international trade data into the U.S. on entries and also carriers and out of the U.S. via exports. ACE is the largest international trade and the largest government program that's working out there that is in the public domain. So it's extremely complicated. The fact that we had CBP rolling out functionality in less than 45 days is amazing, actually. They built on current functionality that they had with edit checks, so that was good. Again, I know I congratulated them last week, but I'm really proud of the team there, what they've been able to accomplish in the past 45 days. But in CAPE refund news, approximately 15% of the entries that were filed for CAPE were rejected for various reasons, most due to unable to calculate duty or a sequencing error. So if you have that error, what you need to do is you need to work with, if you're an importer, you need to work with your customs broker and determine exactly how it was filed. Because if you remember, there was not exactly good guidance that came out when a lot of these duties were introduced, and they were introduced virtually over the weekend or with 1 or 2 days notice. So customs didn't have an opportunity to give us guidance to help us determine as customs brokers how we should actually transmit these entries. That guidance eventually came out, and that is what CAPE is actually measuring against, is that sequencing and that guidance that came out possibly later in that process. So if you are getting those errors for goods that were shipped before the guidance came out, you want to look at the sequencing of those tariff numbers. If you're an importer, work with your customs broker. That's not going to be evident in the ACE reports. And it's also not going to be evident on the 7501 printed copy that you get. So they may have to pull some reports and determine how those were done, retransmit them as a PSC, get it accepted, then file your CAPE report. There's also some reports of the on the water provisions where if something was already in process, you couldn't go back and revise the duty payment. You couldn't lower it. You couldn't actually make it higher. Some of those complexities around those on the water provisions are causing errors, and I do suggest you reach out to CBP on those. But, overall, it's a complex situation right now. We're happy we're going to get refunds, but although just filing the entry numbers is a great process for importers, cleaning up this 15% of those that got rejected is kind of where the complexity of those emotions come out. And, specifically the language of the lyrics say, there'll be happiness after you, but there was happiness because of you. Both of these things can be true. There is happiness. And really, I think that's true. Trade's having its moment. We're happy because we're wanted. We have a higher visibility. We have more jobs out there. We have work that's meaningful and can really help our clients. But there's going to be happiness after this moment passes. My favorite is the song goes on to say, after there is happiness, it goes on to say, in our history, across the great divide, there is a glorious sunrise dappled with flickers of light. So for all of you out there listening, I hope you have a glorious sunrise this weekend that is dappled with flickers of light and that you have a great weekend. We'll talk to you again.